Hello everyone, it's the Afro Adventure here with another album review, and today we are reviewing the album The Velvet Underground and Nico by The Velvet Underground. It was released March 12th of 1967. Some chart information about it. It peaked number 129 on the US Billboard 200. It was released on the label Verve, and its singles are All Tomorrow's Parties with I'll Be Your Mirror as a B-side, and Sunday Morning with Femme Fatale as a B-side. So without further ado, let's get this started. So, as an avid fan of psychedelic rock, I felt obligated to take a look at what is perhaps one of the most influential rock albums ever made. However, in its time, this album wasn't hugely popular, as you can tell by its charting position at 129. In later years, it would garner almost a cult following and became perhaps the band's most popular album, even though it was their very first album. On this record, the Velvet Underground are working with not one, but two superstars, those being the legendary artist Andy Warhol, who was famous for being the forerunner in the pop art movement, and was also the band's manager and producer for this particular LP, and German singer who was working with Andy Warhol at the time, Nico. They had her collaborate on several of the tracks as opposed to lead singer Lou Reed singing every single song. The question now is, which singer had the highlights? This album blends the likes of psychedelic rock with experimental rock, avant-garde, and early proto-punk. The themes explored on this album became a staple with the band and really pushed to the limits of what kinds of themes could even be explored in music. Things like prostitution, drug use, heroin specifically, drug addiction, BDSM, life and death, and self-worth became common themes on this LP, and several of these were explored multiple times on different tracks, letting the listener know that these are the things that the band wants you to remember in particular. The opening track is Sunday Morning, which is actually the most tame and well-produced track on the album. It's light and happy sounding with dark underlying themes of hangovers, and makes great use of the celeste to add to its waking up kind of sound. In fact, Lou Reed wrote this song at around 6 a.m. on a Sunday morning. Talk about being true to your word. As nice as this track is, I don't feel like it prepares the listener for the rest of the album. Even though it talks about the various sins that probably happened the night before, its light sound gives it a feeling of innocence, and this album is anything but. The next track is the first that explores the whole heroin part of this album, I'm Waiting for the Man. At the time, Lou Reed was a heavy heroin addict, and in this repetitive rocker, he talks about how he's waiting for his supplier to come and give him his fix of smack, talking about how he's paranoid his supplier's got his number. This is kind of where we get to the more negative aspects of the album, at least in my opinion. What I mean by that is that after Sunday Morning, the album's production and instrumentals kind of downgrade. Sunday Morning has very professional instrumentation and production, and was made to be the album's biggest single. However, the rest of the album's instrumentation is somewhat bland and repetitive, and the production feels very shoddily done. Whether or not that was intentional, it doesn't sit very well with me. However, I do commend very highly the songwriting. Lou Reed's ability to paint vivid pictures through his lyrics is very, very, very well done, and I feel like that's what he wanted you to focus on the most as the listener. That's the case with a lot of art rock music, but very few tracks on here kept my attention instrumentally. The others that deal heavily with Lou Reed's heroin addiction are Run, 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 which tells the stories of several characters Lou made up and how they all die from heroin overdoses, and the appropriately named Heroin, which goes deeply into detail about Lou's drug addiction, and how deep it truly is, saying that he knows it's killing him and even embraces that fact. It's incredibly sad and chilling, but it's an art. Each separate verse gradually gets faster and more intense, and the song as a whole becomes more and more intense with a rising, high-pitched noise, all this reflecting the effects of heroin itself. Femme Fatale is an interesting track. At the request of producer Andy Warhol, he wanted the band to create a song about his own superstar and muse, Edie Sedgwick, who was more or less a temptress according to the song. This is also the first track that Nico sings on. It's a very lounge jazz-influenced track with the band singing behind her and her deep vocals. Aside from this track, she also performs lead vocals on the tracks All Tomorrow's Parties and I'll Be Your Mirror. On All Tomorrow's Parties, she's describing Lou Reed's very own description of the people Andy Warhol hung around, and how amazed he was by this group. Interestingly enough, they decided to layer Nico's vocals on this track, making it double-tracked. As for I'll Be Your Mirror, it turns out to be one of the most sincere tracks on the album. Very light with a pop feel, this track talks about someone who sees the worth in someone else when they themselves can't see it. To answer my own question from the beginning, I have to be honest, I felt the songs that Nico sang lead on were the highlights of this album. Lou Reed does a very good job giving the tracks a very dreary vibe, almost having a vocal style that mixes Bob Dylan with Mick Jagger, but Nico's dark, deep German accented voice really fit the song as well, and I'll Be Your Mirror was the most melodically pleasing track on the album for me. Next to Sunday Morning, it felt like it had the most to it, even though it was one of the shortest tracks on the album. Moving on, the tracks Venus and Furs and There She Goes Again explore themes that were hardly ever talked about in those days, especially in music: BDSM and prostitution. Venus and Furs gets its title from the book of the same name written by Leopold von Sacher-Masoch, and it's actually his name that the term masochism is derived from. The song follows a lot of the themes of the book regarding the sexually taboo. It was a milestone in songs regarding sex and really pushed the boundaries of how far songs could go. The latter track, There She Goes Again, talks about the life of a prostitute and how she gives oral sex and then, much like Lou Reed himself, injects herself with heroin. These two tracks, along with Heroin, Run Run Run, and the next track, are some of the darkest points on this LP. The Black Angel's Death song would be the second to last track, and it's also the most poetic track on the album. Oddly enough, it has the most lyrics on the album, but it has a very standard length at a little over 3 minutes. It deals with a figure of death known as the Black Angel, musing over life and death. The true meaning behind this song isn't made obvious, but from what the lyrics say, that's the most I can get out of it. The final track on the album, European Sun, was dedicated to Lou Reed's old teacher, Delmore Schwartz. The story goes that Lou wanted to dedicate a song to him, but Mr. Schwartz absolutely detested rock lyrics, so what he did was he wrote a song with few lyrics and mostly instrumentals. The first minute or so refers a lot to Mr. Schwartz's life and the negativity revolving around it, while the other 6 or so minutes is a psychedelic improvised rock section that gradually gets more and more intense, much like how Heroin did. It's crazy and it's loud, but it fits. It's almost scary even. Overall, this isn't your Beatles or Pink Floyd brand of psychedelic rock. It's not even your Jimi Hendrix brand of psychedelic rock. As an art rock album, it blends more elements of noise rock and early punk rock. Honestly, some tracks were better than others. Like I said, the production and instrumentation gradually declined, but the songwriting was pretty top-notch. However, the tracks that Nico sang lead on were some of the better tracks, and it almost seems like they made the instrumentals better just for her leads. I don't know if this means that Andy Warhol wasn't a great producer, or if it was meant to sound this way intentionally. Either way, my opinion stands that some tracks were just plain drab when it came to how they were arranged instrumentally. Nothing really stuck out on those tracks besides Lou Reed's vocals and the lyrics. But as for the album as a whole, it was rather enjoyable. It's not long at all, only having about 11 tracks, and the themes explored in this album make it a very interesting journey. Anyways, thank you very much for watching this another album review. If you like this video, please hit that like button and that subscribe button. It really helps. And also, if you want a song or an album reviewed that you like or may recommend, just leave a comment down below or hit me up on my Facebook or my Twitter. The links are in the description. And thank you once again. I will see you in the next video. So long.